Hey, well, welcome to the special edition of Real Life. And we have got Jeff Myers with us today. And what I love about Jeff is not only his commitment to Christ, but how God has used him over the years to make an impact in the culture. And what I mean about that specifically, his passion is to get the next generation engaged in the culture for Christ, to get them discipled and up out of the pew, and can I say it this way, out on the streets, where life is being determined by so many people for your children, for your high schooler, for your college-age kid. Jeff's in the trenches. His desire is to get our kids thinking and engaging the culture, developing a biblical worldview. And listen, if there's hope for America, it's of course for this next generation to rise up with a biblical worldview and stand for what's right. And so I hope you enjoy our program together with Jeff Myers of Summit, and you can learn more about him at summit.org. But Jeff Myers is our special guest right now on Real Life. Well, Jeff, first of all, it's great to have you with us, and I'm excited because you represent, for me, hope and encouragement in this kind of a package. Summit Ministries and what you do it's answering and providing that which the church has so often been derelict on duty regarding, and when we come to the place of having a young person in our lives, we think we're doing the right thing. And then we find out later that their faith is drifting, or they've got questions that we can't answer. So I want to ask you right from the get-go, what is the greatest threat today that's upon our young people? What are you seeing with your exposure to America's youth?
I'd say there are three things. The first question that every young person is asking is, what is my purpose? Why am I here?
That's
why am I on this planet? Yeah. And the second question they're asking is, do I matter? You know, I think if I were to be like Huckleberry Finn and I built a raft and floated off down the river, would anybody even miss me?
Yeah. Wow.
You know, a lot of kids are asking that. Do I even important? Does it even matter that I'm here? And third question they're asking is, what's actually true? And when I was in high school, I had a lot of unanswered questions. Sure. I'd go, my poor Sunday school teacher, I'd just come into class and say, you know, what about hell? Doesn't that seem like overkill? I mean, most people really aren't that bad. You know, just the whole discussion would go all over the place. And he didn't know what to do. And in fact, that's how I ended up going to Summit Ministries myself to study with David Noble. And when I got there, I asked him, I walked right in the place, I met him, and I said, look, I hope you have a lot of answers because I have a lot of questions. I mean, can you imagine somebody being so rude in a conversation? I was a teenager.
But that had to be refreshing for him.
That's what desperate. He wanted. Yeah. That's what he wanted.
That's what he wanted.
And he said to me, all right, let me ask you a question first. He said, what do you have in your life that's so worth living for, you'd be willing to die for it? I'd never known anybody who thought like that. See, everybody I knew was functioning as a materialist. Yeah, God exists, praise Jesus. But they lived as if he was irrelevant to life.
Oh, yes.
So when I met David Noble and got involved with Summit, I realized for the first time, when we talk about a spiritual world, an immaterial world, the supernatural world, this is just as real as this table that we're sitting around right now.
That's right.
And if that's true, it changes everything about how we live our lives. But there are also, Jack, a lot of the students who come to us who not only have unanswered questions, they have unquestioned answers.
Explain that.
As some friends of ours. Some of my students put together a group called Access, and they travel around and they talk about this. But there are a lot of kids who grew up in church and they say, okay, sure, I trust you. I trust my Sunday school teacher. I trust my youth pastor. I believe what I've been taught. But in the real world, iron sharpens iron. Mm-hmm. If you're not prepared to defend something, it won't last as a belief. So a lot of students go off, sure, creation, I don't believe evolution. Then they go into their biology class and the teacher very methodically says, okay, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's how we know what we know. And all of a sudden, the student's in a crisis of faith.
Because that evolutionary view was defended by the teacher, a person in authority, makes sense now to the student.
So here's what we do at Summit that's different. We tell them about evolution. We
Right
tell them
on.
about creation. We have them learn how to defend creation
Excellent.
right there on the spot. So when they get to the class, they don't have to say, my professor must be right, because it's my professor versus my Sunday school teacher.
Of course.
The professor must be right. Instead, they're thinking, I've met some of the top scientists of our day,
Right
and
on.
they're all believers.
That's right.
I don't have to believe my professor.
Yeah.
So in the classroom, that crisis of faith turns into an opportunity to grow in their faith.
I love what you just said a second ago. It got me thinking, because you can Google, you can read a book, you can look at debates of brilliant men on both sides of the argument, right?
Right, that's right.
Look, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins, these guys are not dumb.
Right.
And they argue passionately about their particular worldview, in their case, that there is no God, or more technically, they don't agree with the God that is.
Right.
But then you've got brilliant guys. You have Francis Collins, for example.
John Lennox.
Or John Lennox. Equally brilliant, arguing for the existence of God, which I think would bring just a very remedial thinker like myself to a point of concluding, hey, this may not be an intellectual battle after all. You got two guys. In fact, if you look at the fathers of science, Kepler and others, Einstein, being with a Jewish background, didn't believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, but he argued for the existence of God many times.
Right.
These are brilliant people. So all of a sudden, I'm having to deal with, it's not an intellectual issue, is it?
It's not intellectual.
It's a personal...
It might be partly intellectual. It's how you think through certain things. But you're exactly right, and science is a great example. Rodney Stark, who's a sociologist and historian at Baylor University, said there are 52 people who are responsible for the development of modern science. 52.
Yeah.
Only one of them was an atheist.
Exactly.
Only one.
Yeah.
All the others were Christians.
Yeah.
In fact, he said 60% of them were devout Christians. They could be pastors in our churches today. They were like that.
That's right.
So our students, if they know you don't have to check your brain at the door to be a Christian. Christianity is not when you turn off the rest of the world. It is an approach to everything else in the world. Then they get a vision for what it means to love Jesus and love the world around them. They can be curious rather than cynical. They can engage rather than disengage and try to escape. And it changes everything. We're watching, our summit program starts with a 12-day course. Students come, California, Colorado, and Tennessee for 12 days. And in that 12 days, they meet some of the world-class philosophers, economists, ethicists, all these people. And it's especially fun. They hear lectures from them, but then the speaker will sit in a rocking chair on the front porch of the Summit Hotel and say, any question you want to ask, go right ahead and ask.
Open house, huh?
Yeah. So the students come away knowing this person's not afraid of any question.
That's right.
So I don't have to be afraid of any question either.
That's right.
And we're finding that their feeling of closeness to God grows, their understanding of their faith, their devotional life, their prayer life, everything begins to blossom.
That's what happens when you get your questions answered, isn't it?
They have answers. They know there are answers, even if they don't know them all. They're now confident that God is real.
Yeah.
I feel close to Him. I'm not afraid to engage with. And when I meet somebody who has a completely different worldview, I don't have to be defensive or angry anymore. I don't have to put out bumper sticker slogans and things like that.
And that's what
I
I've seen. Jeff, when kids leave a church believing in Jesus, to whatever degree only God knows, but they believe in Jesus, they get eaten up at college.
Right.
There's not only this doubt about what it is that they've always believed, there's this newfound romance of intellectualism. What happens, what I've seen, is that when you mix those two things together, they come back home, or they come back to their old friends or to their old church with a very, very deep-rooted animosity, almost a bitterness, an anger, a hostility, because they feel that they had been ripped off by their Sunday school teacher or pastor for all those years. What do you say to them? What do you say? I'm that person now, Jeff. And I come back to church and I say, oh, hi, Jeff. You know what? I found out that there is no God after all. And so, yeah, I'm here on Christmas break, and I don't believe those things anymore.
Yeah.
What do you say to me?
Yeah. You know, all I do is I want to take them to coffee. I want to walk alongside of them. And this is so important for everybody who's watching this right now. You don't have to rescue them. They're God's child. He cares about them more than we do.
Yeah.
And so our job is to walk alongside of them as God does what He's going to do in their lives. You know, this is fascinating because it doesn't have to do with apologetics or worldview. But one study showed that young people who have an adult mentor in church are 3 times as likely to stay as those who don't.
A discipler.
Just somebody who says, let's have coffee. You tell me what you have been learning about. You just tell me about it. Would you be willing to consider another viewpoint? Wow. Could I give you a book? Just read a chapter, I'll read a chapter, and we'll talk about it. You can even say to them, you know, some of what you're talking about is going over my head. It's been so long since I looked at any of that myself, but I love you, and I want to have coffee with you, and I want to keep talking about it. Let them talk, let them explain, walk alongside of them, get a little book you can study, Mere Christianity, or any book by Frank Turek,
Right.
Our Summit Ministries, we have 73 different instructors. And Frank Turek and Alex McFarland and Josh McDowell and Sean McDowell, all these guys have written tremendous resources that can be used just to say, hey, you read a chapter, I'll read a chapter, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
That's the answer. Yeah. It is it's truth in the context of relationship.
Yeah. The educational system today across these states, I don't even know how to critique it anymore, and it's kind of off the charts because it's more than education. Now it's a for us as Christians with a biblical worldview. I mean, they not only have a different worldview, it's volatile and hostile towards any other worldview. But Summit is about shaping a defendable worldview, biblical worldview. Right.
Yep. That's it. Our approach to other worldviews is not that they have no truth, because there are grains of truth on the seashores of every worldview.
Yeah, that's
it's that they're so shriveled when it comes to explaining reality.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. The dominant worldview on university campuses today is secularism.
Yes, sure.
Okay? Secularism says there may be a God, there may not be. Either way, it's irrelevant to what really matters in life. So if you ask a secularist, why do you think that? And you'll eventually get to 2 things. Number one, they'll say, only the material world exists. There is no spiritual, no supernatural, no immaterial. Only the material world exists.
And they're authoritative on it, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we know this. Yeah. And the second thing they'll tell you is everything that came to be through undirected natural processes.
That's right.
Now, here's the thing, Jack. Secularists never prove either one of those assumptions.
They
assume them.
That's right.
And then they build their whole worldview on that basis. If a Christian's not ready to look at the world of ideas, they might be tricked. They might think, maybe they're right. And so, okay, well, maybe there is room for God here or there. And then God becomes the God of the gaps. Whatever's left that you can't explain, then we'll stick God in there.
Yeah.
Right? Instead, you go straight to the root of the tree and say, I challenge the idea that only the material world exists.
Right on.
Because if only the material world exists, we wouldn't be thinking about the
thoughts.
material world right now.
That's right.
Any idea of justice would just be whatever people in power make it up. Love?
Right.
Do you love your spouse?
Yeah, what is that?
I remember one of our students one time asked the famous philosopher Richard Rorty, when you love your wife, do you believe she has a soul? And he said, I do. Now, he doesn't even believe in the soul, this guy. He doesn't believe in anything outside of the material world, but he believes that love is actually real. So and this was a kid who just raised his hand in an open forum and asked this question for of all these people. But see, they're not afraid to ask the questions anymore because they understand these people have a worldview. Richard Dawkins has a worldview. He has assumptions he makes by faith that he never proves,
That's right.
So as long as you understand that going into it, then you realize Christianity is not a second-rate worldview.
Right.
It's actually a first-rate worldview.
Oh, absolutely.
So if Christianity says there's a material
it's a
world,
transcendent worldview.
it is.
He brought it to us. It came down.
It came down. The incarnation, the truth, the relationship together. The material world exists. So does the immaterial world. These original scientists studied the world because they believed it actually existed.
That's right.
Okay, and
That's right.
Not only did it actually exist, but it's a good world, and therefore God wants us to study it.
With purpose.
Right.
They believed it had purpose.
If we were to reclaim those aspects of a Christian worldview in churches today, I think our students would be prepared to be leaders in every significant area of society.
Listen, the reason why we're sitting at this table right now, quite frankly, to be totally transparent to all of you that are watching right now, is the fact that I love what Jeff's doing. I love what he stands for. That's my bias. He's right. Having said that, what what does the American church need to do now to implement the summit vision? I guess I should say this first, ask you this. Where is the American church failing? What does the American church need to do?
One of the areas I see it failing in this seems like an indirect answer to the question, but I think it's in intergenerational relationships. It bugs me that it's possible for an older person to go to church and never meet a young adult, or a young adult to go to church and never meet an older adult. I wonder if we could break down that segregation in a way that restores natural relationships. That going to church is more like a family reunion than it is like going to school.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be one huge thing. I think the second thing is to not be afraid of bringing up ideas that really matter in the world. One thing young adults tell me, and I've worked with so many of them, and I really feel this is a strong point. They have said, I want my church to teach a Christian worldview that applies to the issues I face every day outside of the church.
That's right.
And what they're actually asking is this. They go to their job, they're around the water cooler, somebody says, well, what about same-sex marriage, or what about this? These students want to have credible, compassionate ways to defend a Christian worldview on the issues that really matter.
That's right.
So when we say, we've got to be beyond the issues, transcend the issues, I don't believe that. Maybe that's a Buddhist idea. The Buddha, you always see the Buddha with his eyes closed. And I think the answer is, if his eyes are open, his worldview doesn't work.
That's right.
He has to close his eyes to what's really real, or else his worldview doesn't work.
That's right.
We want a worldview that's open to what's actually happening in the real world around us, the real issues. What's a biblical worldview of poverty care? What's a biblical worldview of creation care? What's a biblical worldview of foster care?
Right.
What's a biblical worldview of trying to get enough water to your city in the time of a drought? All of these things are things Christians should be thinking about and caring about.
Absolutely. In fact, I won't name him because he could be found out, but he's a particular Christian professor at a local university, Christian university here in Southern California. He told me if the church would do its job, I would be out of a job.
Wow.
I thought that was a profound statement.
That's a stunning thing to say.
Because he teaches apologetics.
Yeah.
And his argument was the church is not preparing these kids for the university campus, and so they're getting eaten up because they can't defend what they claim to believe. And what a disillusionment that is to say you believe in Jesus, or this is why I believe the Bible's true, and then you really can't defend that. But tell us about the hopeful signs. Are you seeing anything, Jeff, on the horizon? The efforts of Summit and things that you see. What kind of a young person for the future is coming out of Summit? And before we end this, I want you to also put a plea out. I want you to really plug Summit before we part ways.
I will absolutely do it. I believe in this program.
Amen.
It's so significant. I believe it could be the hope.
Yes.
For our nation. What I'm seeing that's so hopeful is young adults who recognize they don't have to apologize for biblical orthodoxy.
That's right.
They don't have to understand every aspect of it. They can still embrace that there are mysteries, there are things we don't understand. You see, we don't have to know the truth exhaustively, but we can know it truly, right? And there's a difference, right? So these students embrace biblical orthodoxy. They learn some of the answers to the questions that bother them the most, the ones that they aren't sure that around the water cooler or in the student lounge they could actually defend. They learn some of those answers. Then they band together with their peers, find wise mentors across the generations. And they actually, I think, are starting to rebuild a sense of Christian community. We have young adults working in politics, in the military, in business, and science, and medicine, in every imaginable area of life. And they feel for the first time that they're bringing their faith in. This is not just, that their church is not just something I do to get away from this world, but my faith is what I bring into every aspect of this.
I love it.
And when they do it, it's unreal the impact they can have. One of our students, we were just talking about him in our office the other day. He's now a world famous blogger. I mean, millions of people read his material. And he's just a normal guy who believes the truth actually is defensible in the public sphere.
You can't stop someone like that. In fact, they tried to stop someone like that. And that gentleman responded by saying that to live is Christ and to die is gain. You can't stop someone like that.
No, you can't.
Because they're equipped. They know what they believe, and they know how to take it into a world. You know, so much, I don't need to tell you this, but for some of our listeners, the world is really intimidating out there. And they get excited at church on Sunday, but then they kind of tuck tail between the leg because they got to show up on Monday. And that's really unfortunate. I really firmly believe, and I all credit to the church that I was born again at and raised up in, where when Jesus said, "Let your light so shine," Pastor Chuck Smith he taught us that there's no place where you're not supposed to shine that light.
Right.
So that means everywhere. Yeah. And when you know that, there's a joy and an excitement. Christianity should be anything but boring. And a lot of people today would say, it's so boring. And if it's boring, you're doing it wrong, if you think about it. But to have these kids being equipped. So why should first of all, what's the parameters for Summit? Why should I send my kid to Summit? How does my kid qualify to go to Summit? How does this work?
We want every 16 to 21-year-old young person in America to come to Summit. They don't need to be strong in their faith to be able to come. That's really the point. In fact, if they have a lot of questions, we welcome them. All the better. All the better. If they say, I love Jesus and I just don't know what to do with this, perfect. That's really good. So 16 to 21-year-old students will come to study during the summertime for 12 days. So we have a campus in California, campus in Colorado, campus in Tennessee. We want 5,000. Right now we have about 2,000 young people a year, so it's gone way up, pretty rapidly, but we want 5,000 young people a year. 5,000 young people. You realize, if you take the political leaders in the United States of America, in every state, at every level, from dog catcher to president, it's only 500,000 people.
I didn't realize that.
And out of the 500,000 people, only 10% of them do all the work. 50,000 people run the entire country. If we train 5,000 young people a year, then in 10 years, they could move in, not only staying strong in their faith when everybody else is falling apart, but then they can begin to move into every area of society and bring a godly influence to bear. The church's job, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, is to help the state be the state, right? That's the vision in politics. But it's true in economics and in justice and all these different areas of life. A biblical viewpoint brought to bear would bring flourishing to our nation. Awesome. And that's really the vision.
That is powerful. So you said you're at 2,000 now, but you'd like to reach 5,000. What does it cost for a student to?
It's going to be about $1,500, so a little over $100 a day.
If there's somebody watching right now that's got a pocketbook, they would send that to summit.org?
They could send the money to us, and we will help pick out the students. They can identify a student, their child, their grandchild. Lots of grandmas and grandpas will say, I'll give you a $1,500 scholarship to college if you will go to this program for $3,000. Then they get their grandchild there. It usually takes 2 or 3 days, but then they call up and they say, "Grandma, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Thank you for sending me to this."
You just answered a really excellent question that you asked earlier in our talk. We need to bridge the generational gap.
Right.
By action. You are really underlining that. Because it's important enough to grandparents to say to grandkids, we'd like you to go to Summit.
Yeah.
Grandma and grandpa, they've lived a little bit, they got some scars, they got some gray hair, and they know a little bit. And there's that wonderful bridge. So people can sponsor. They can sponsor directly, they can sponsor in just supporting Summit.
Right. Churches can do this as well. We've got a number of churches that'll bring 5 or 10 or 20. Like, this is kind of a fun story. One guy told me, he said, I told the kids from my church, we need to get you to Summit. He said, I'm confident you'll raise the money. Yeah. That's what he said to them.
Yeah.
Now, what he meant by that was, whatever you don't raise, I will pay.
Yeah.
But they thought he meant, oh, he believes in us. So they went out and raised all the money they needed. So he sent the check to Summit and said, find some kids from an urban area or whatever and just help them come as well.
I love it.
Yeah, this is mission critical. Are we going to invest in this rising generation in a significant, substantial way to move them onto the battlefield of life? Because they are going into battle, prepared or not, they're going into battle.
Absolutely.
And right now, Jack, 70% of them who are significantly involved in youth group in their high school years are no longer even attending church by the time they reach their mid-20s. What if they weren't just attending? What if they were leading? And what if they were leading not only in the church, but they were leading in the military and in medicine and in science and in philosophy and all these other areas of life? The kind of people who can get a vision for that, the kind of people we want to have as part of our Summit community.
And we would have another enlightenment. We would have another generation of worldview thinkers that has either God or the principles of God right in the center of the public square.
Do we dare believe this? I mean, we look at our world now and we say, what a mess. Do we actually have the faith to believe that it not only could be in a place where it's not a mess, but that God would actually work through the mess to bring about this kind of a reformation or enlightenment? Awesome. Do we actually believe that?
Awesome, yes. You guys, Jeff Myers, summit.org. Look, I'm not asking for the money. I don't want it. I want you to send your money to Jeff at summit.org. If there's hope for America, and there is because God's on the throne, we're at a dark hour, but you know what? All of God's great works came out of dark times, and Summit is preparing the next generation. So give generously to what they're doing. Go online, find out more about it. And above all things, remember this, it's Jesus Christ who is the very one that's responsible for your breath. He died on the cross for your sins and my sins, for Jeff's sins, for us. He rose again from the dead. It's not a fable, it's not a myth, it's a reality. And you need to surrender to Him. He saves sinners, and that joyous announcement is why Jeff and I would take cuts to get in line again to get saved by Jesus if need be, because He loves, and He loves you. Turn your heart to Christ. Watch what He does with you. God bless you. God bless you, Jeff. Awesome.
Thanks,
Great
Jack.
job.
As Christians, our biblical worldview is being challenged. How should we respond? Learn how you can apply biblical truth to engage our culture for Christ. Get your copy of the Engage California Conference on USB flash drive. It includes the entire conference, 8 messages in MP3 audio and MP4 video format, and the cost is just $30. Listen to this list of great speakers: Frank Turek, Jeff Myers, Alan Schleiman, Raphael Cruz, Eric Stanley, Karen England, John Keller, Tim Donnelly, Gina Gleason, and of course, our very own Jack Hibbs. To get your USB copy of the Engage California Conference, go to reallifewithjackhibbs.org. That's reallifewithjackhibbs.org. This entire Engage conference on a USB drive is just $30. Get your USB copy of the Engage California Conference today.